Hello, everyone. Happy Monday, and welcome to another edition of Sports Speak. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
A lot to get to today. We actually had action in one of the four major sports this weekend. It was exhibition. It was the quote-unquote summer camp games in baseball, but we got to watch some baseball. We're just 4 days away from opening day. We're just 10 days away from the start of the NBA season. The restart in the bubble, and 2 weeks away from the return of hockey. So it's definitely exciting what's going on right now. But we're going to focus on baseball and get a little into NASCAR towards the end of the show. But we're going to start with baseball. We watched some Mets-Yankees action these last 2 days. That's probably been one of the headlining games. We've seen the Cubs in action, the Nats, the Phillies. But Mets and Yankees, the Yankees offense is clearly firing on all cylinders right now, and they're healthy. Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, and Gary Sanchez combined for 4 home runs off the Mets yesterday en route to a 6-0 victory. On the other end for the Mets, their offense has struggled a little bit these first 2 games, but the concern at least, because we know their offense goes through spurts, the concern is the pitching staff, especially beyond Jacob deGrom in the rotation. And then in the bullpen, Seth Lugo looked really good yesterday. Hunter Strickland as well, but everybody else has really struggled, including Edwin Diaz, Drew Smith, Chasen Shreve. It's really exposed that the Mets have a lot of holes and how good the Yankees team can be now that they actually are healthy.
Well, Eddie, the way I look at it is that when you turn around and you see what happened for the Mets in particular, the signings in the bullpen, yes, you got Dylan Betances, that's huge. Chasen Shreve was solid back when he was with the Yankees, but ever since he was traded away to St. Louis, his career kind of, dwindled upon the distance. He was an acquisition for the Luke Voit trade the Yankees had. But, the way I look at it is this for the Mets. I know things don't look so good now, but you have to remember this. The offense is going to come. I know Pete Alonso hasn't really looked good the last few days, especially flailing at fastballs. But these guys are getting back in the game rhythm. And I think that you're going to see come Thursday a total different New York Mets team. Now, on the opposite side, the Yankees, hey, they're looking great offensively. You look at the 4 crucial hitters for the Yankees. Stanton, Judge, who homers twice. Voit, he hits a home run. Sanchez. It's critical that they're doing good because these are players last year that spent most of the season injured. So it's good to see that they're being productive. But as I said last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, Eddie, when we were talking about our baseball predictions, I still just don't see – I know the Yankees are off to a great start, but I still just don't see once we go to Washington a hot start beginning. Because you have to remember this. Okay, that's great. The Yankees yesterday, I know they saw Rick Porcello once, and then yesterday you come home and you get to play another average game. But the realism is come Thursday, you face Max Scherzer. The Yankees aren't facing an ace in this preseason affair. They're facing a bunch of average starters that are looking for a job right now. And the realism is that if the Yankees don't come with the bats in Washington, in D.C., which, by the way, those games, as well, I didn't know, Fetty, just got approved yesterday to even be played.
Yes.
I thought was interesting. It's going to be a worry. But the Mets on the opposite end, I think it's going to be total opposite. I know their swings aren't good now, but give them a couple days, and I think their offense is going to be booming. I think the same story, though, for the Mets this year is going to be that relief pitching. I think Betances is a huge acquisition. I think really Familia does step up this year, as weird as that sounds. I think he has a comeback season this year, but it really does lie on the Shreve, on the Strickland, who is a bigger acquisition for them, because those guys I don't want to say they don't have roles, because they do, but they have to get big outs when it matters. And I know the Mets, and I still said this, I think the Mets are a borderline wildcard team. It's going to be very hard for them to win the NL East, but really don't count them out. I think there's some good offense. There's some good potential. And again, the first 2 days, other than I know the hitting hasn't been good, what is there to look at when you haven't been throwing? It's not like you threw DeGrom out there, so there's not really much to look forward to other than, all right, baseball's back. And by the way, I do want to mention one more thing, Eddie, before I pass it on to you, is that, to me, it sounds so good with the fan noise that it's like it makes you want to feel like you're into the game. I mean, I've always been in the game of baseball. I love every single out, every single pitch because it means something, but it doesn't feel like anywhere there's been a missed step either at Citi Field or Yankee Stadium throughout these first 2 days in terms of the fan noise and the surrounding noise. It feels like you're right at home.
Yeah, I'll get into that in a moment. I'm going to start, though, just back to what you were saying, which I think is a good point here. Who the Yankees were facing. And there were three pitchers, three of the guys you expect to see in the bullpen for the Mets this year. Jeurys Familia, Seth Lugo, Hunter Strickland, who all looked really good against the Yankees, especially Strickland and Familia, who were still facing some of those Yankees starters. But, of course, they were taking advantage of guys like Corey Oswalt, who's not going to be a starter on the Mets unless there's an injury in their rotation. Drew Smith, Chasen Shreve, who are borderline if they're going to be on the roster at the beginning of the season. So it's going to be interesting to see how that translates, especially when they face the Nationals, who have such a great pitching staff. Other teams like Atlanta, Tampa Bay, that they're going to be facing a lot that have really good staffs, both rotation and bullpen. But it's a good start for them. As for the Mets, it's still 2 games in. There's guys coming back from injury like Yoenis Cespedes. So I want to be honest, he's looked pretty good, especially in the simulated games so far. And it's a contract year, so he's going to be playing really hard to try to get a new contract despite the injuries. Pete Alonso, we know he goes through areas, but my main problem with him is just he becomes too much of a free swinger, swinging for the fences every time. I know he wants to hit the home runs, and he's going to hit the home runs, but if he focuses a little more on just simply making contact, the power will come with it, and he'll get a higher average and be more productive to the team. Of course, Jeff McNeil is the whole opposite end of that with how he's able to produce. But with McNeil, with Alonso, Cespedes, Conforto, overall, it's a good group of guys that they got there. And I do want to get into the fan noise, though, because I don't know. I sort of disagree with you because I've watched 3 games, parts of 3 games. I watched Mets Yankees. I was watching Dodgers Diamondbacks with my dad yesterday, and I watched some Cubs White Sox. And I was listening to all the different ways they're doing the fans. The one thing I do like, first off, is how at Citi Field and then in Chavez Ravine, how they've been selling that you could have a cutout of you put out into the stands. I think that's cool how they did that for both the Mets and the Dodgers. I think it's very creative that they've brought that in. But I feel like the best that I've heard so far was at Wrigley Field with the crowd noise because it's consistent throughout the game. Same with the Dodgers. With the Mets and the Yankees, both of them, they were getting ripped apart on Twitter because there were certain instances where there was, and it's going to get better as the season goes on, but like these ridiculous cheers for like these little things. Evan Roberts from WFAN tweeted out how Giancarlo Stanton last night hit one of the longest home runs I've seen at Yankee Stadium in a long time, all the way up to the second deck in the deepest part of the park in left center field. And the crowd noise was kind of low. But then in the first inning, Gleyber Torres hits a little single into right field, and it sounds like the Yankees just won their 28th World Series. So, I think that's going to get better as time goes on. I like that these teams are being creative. Just doesn't have to sound too phony. But, these players thrive off the sound around them. Even in road games, when they get booed and stuff, they thrive off of that. But we're seeing that being used by these teams, and I think that's going to be good in the long run. So it's going to be interesting to watch these next couple days. We've got a few more simulation summer camp games, whatever you want to call them. A few teams in action. Houston's got their first game today. Minnesota, the Cardinals. Not every team is playing, taking advantage of these up to 3 summer camp games, but there are some playing just 1, some playing all 3. But we're going to see them in action. One that I'm really excited to watch tonight, actually, at 6 o'clock. The Yankees and Phillies squaring off. Joe Girardi facing off the team he used to play for and used to manage, so that should be fun. And also seeing the Houston Astros back on the field. They're facing Kansas City in a couple games. So it's going to be fun to watch nonetheless. But the real story I want to get to with baseball, you were talking about how the Nationals just got approved they can play in D.C. Well, there's one team who is not. The Toronto Blue Jays, who originally it seemed like they were going to get approval to play in Canada. It's been reversed in Ontario, so they're not going to be able to play in Canada right now. So they're looking at different places they can play. Buffalo, which was originally the idea because that's the AAA home, but first of all, that's a AAA ballpark. So unless you want Vladdy Jr. hitting 60 home runs with no lighting in the outfield, that's not really a feasible option. Then it was about going to the spring facility in Florida. But in the end, do you really want that any more teams going to Florida, which is really the head point of all coronavirus right now? So that's kind of out of the loop. Then I heard yesterday how PNC Park in Pittsburgh has been heard that they might share that stadium with the Pirates, which, you know what? At least it's a major league ballpark, but I think that would be interesting scheduling wise because, there's going to be instances where Pittsburgh and Toronto are both home. So double headers in the stadium. How will you do that with safety, cleansing, and stuff? So I want to get your take on this. Where do you think the Blue Jays should go?
Well, first off, I think if they went to Buffalo, New York would get their coveted third team that they haven't had in a long time. But, I look at it like this. Yes, the ideal place would probably, for them, to be honest, would be PNC because it's a major league ballpark. But at the end of the day, I really do think they're going to go to Buffalo. It's a cheaper move for them. After all, they own the ballpark in Buffalo. And I think that will be the move. And the key part too, Eddie, I think is I know they're going to be traveling throughout the season, but the big issue is travel. You're going to tell these players that they're going to go from Canada and then travel all the way to Pittsburgh or even travel down south to Florida. It's unreasonable because these players, unless they're living in a bubble like the NBA, they're not going to be able to, just find homes in an instant during this time. And unless, even hotels are hard to book at this point. So to me, I feel that Buffalo's an easier solution. The travel's not that far. And hey, it could bring some, future maybe as well to Buffalo. And maybe that, not saying that, Toronto is going to move anytime, the Blue Jays aren't going to move from Toronto anytime. But hey, it's a good alternate solution if there's a fan base that pops up down the road. And I think it also does help, that stadium a little bit because I really thought, Eddie, that I thought that we were going to see some more use of minor league parks this year because of the fact that A, they're not being utilized because of the minor league season being canceled, but also B, some cities, some towns may, cancel and not allow teams to play in their home stadiums. I think this would be a good first step because I'm sure there's going to be other teams that we just haven't heard of yet that may say, no, you may not be able to play here and you're going to have to find somewhere else. But the problem is that their solution, whatever they come up with, has to come quickly because the season starts on Thursday. So it's not like they have many days to prepare for this.
Yeah, fortunately, the Blue Jays don't start at home until July 29th, but it's a tough spot for them to be in. But you mentioned Buffalo and also these minor league parks. Like, it's got to be tough. Obviously, we know how difficult this is for the minor league players not getting their season, and we've seen a bit of a scale down. Some teams in the minor leagues have been completely disbanded by Rob Manfred in the last couple of years. It's really been consolidated a bit. But there's these cities too where these minor league teams, while we might not think about it, these AA and AAA teams that are very supported there. And these people that like baseball, maybe they're not going to get a major league team in the future. But first of all, I would leave that option open. We've seen how hockey just recently expanded from 30 to 31. They're going to get their 32nd team soon enough. So you wonder, will baseball follow that path at some point as well? There's also been rumors about the NBA, if they would try to go back to Seattle, try to expand at some point. But, Buffalo is a good sports city. They've supported the Sabres. They still support the Bills even through the thick and thin. So I think it wouldn't be the worst thing for them to try to drum up some business in Buffalo and utilize that minor league park. It's a nice park, but I will say, though, think about some guys like Pete Alonso, Aaron Judge, Vladdy, of course, because that would be his home park. They're going to be playing in all of these small ballparks throughout the season. If there's a division where you could somehow see someone hit 30 home runs in 60 days, it would be the East in the AL or the NL, probably either Alonso, one of the Yankees sluggers, maybe Vladdy. Those are probably the best options because think about the parks they're going to be playing in. Citizens Bank Park, Yankee Stadium, Fenway Park. If they're playing in Buffalo at a AAA stadium, there's going to be so many hitters-friendly parks that they're going to have the opportunity to play at.
Well, that's the other, situation you face. But there is something I also do want to bring up because you talked about in terms of how Toronto's process has gone to this point. Now, I do want to say one thing. This kind of shows in regards to how Canada feels about the coronavirus situation and how much I would say, and I don't want to get political on this, but it shows that how much trust they don't have in how America is handling the virus right now, which makes me want to think and imagine what would have happened if Tampa Bay's proposal had gotten approved and they got to split the season in Montreal. Now, obviously, we know that's not going to happen, but imagine now we would have to double down on this scenario, and you'd have two people trying to find homes. Now, I do feel this, though, that, and again, not every team has gotten approved yet. So I'm eager to see if Toronto's not the only team that has this issue. Like, I'm very nervous that teams in the West Coast, especially like the Dodgers, for example. I actually think the Dodgers did get approved, but just utilizing them as an example. Let's say if the Dodgers, they don't get approved. All right, so where the heck did the Dodgers go now? I mean, at least Toronto had an option of that they had a ball club or a AAA ballpark in America. But you're going to start seeing, I think, a lot of these minor league stadiums, especially, transitioning over to the East Coast, which makes me want to ask you in this regard as well. If a team here gets denied, do you think that instead of, going through all these renovations of having to change up the ballpark and, for example, Toronto having to put all these things, why not for just this season change your team name to the AAA team name or whatever the home team of the ballpark is? Because I think it would be pretty cool, for to see the Buffalo Bisons, for example, out there playing every single day.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting idea, but a major league team, any of the ownership with the major league team would not want to just give up its likeness for the entire year. I just don't think that would be feasible for them, and I mean I don't see anyone really supporting that. But I mean it's an idea, but it's gonna be it's just the one thing I think people are forgetting about. They're gonna be like, oh, once this Toronto situation is resolved, and that'll be it. Not necessarily, because we're still seeing the cases skyrocketing. What if Florida, Texas, California, if Gavin Newsom becomes outspoken, if Ron DeSantis in Florida changes his opinion at some point, I don't know if that's going to happen, but if they don't want the baseball teams there, I think we're going to see a lot of minor league parks. I mean, and these minor league teams too, they're in smaller cities, and in a lot of cases, they're in the Midwest, they're in the Southwest, they're in areas that, other than Arizona, are not really too affected by coronavirus right now. They're in rural areas that don't have that many cases and have solid ballparks too that could be used. But the whole issue with AAA ballparks is if they're so small. But you know what? Maybe you can just sacrifice it and deal with it for this just 160-game season, because the importance is actually to get action going on the field.
Now, I do have to ask you this. I know there was a situation as well for a couple teams. It's not particularly the Toronto situation, but have we heard for the couple teams that have had major players that haven't come into camp yet? Because I'm eager to see, obviously what that situation, obviously I know players have privacy, excuse me, but what do you think about the situation like that where some teams, have major players that aren't coming in? And I'm not talking about opting to sit out the season, but we don't have answers to why they're there. Do you think that they're going to be eligible for the season if that's the case?
Well, I think it's really going to go on a team-by-team basis. I'm going to start with the Mets as an example, because Wilson Ramos took a couple days to get with the team. He wasn't with the team for either of those exhibition games against the Yankees because of a quote-unquote personal issue he was dealing with. We don't know what that was. I mean, and we're seeing this across sports leagues. Like Zion Williamson had to leave the bubble a few days ago for a family matter. We haven't heard anything about that. So, I mean, respecting the privacy of the players is key at this point. But, I think this is going to happen throughout the league, and it's going to continue throughout the year. For example, Mike Trout has said how there's a chance he might leave at the birth of his child, who is due in September. So if he only plays part of the season and then he says to the Angels, I'm out, and I don't think that's going to be the only example of that. I still think in every league, once it gets started, there's going to be a couple of players who will play a couple of games and might bail out because they'll be a little concerned. We've already seen a few players bail out of the season already, but, I mean, it's not a tremendous amount of people. I mean, it's about 15, 20 significant players, but it's not that big of a deal. Each team has lost, maybe 1-2 guys. And these teams, I mean, it's expendable too. Think about how many guys you have in the major leagues. Think about how many guys on your roster you have this year. You have this whole 60-man roster prepared for you that you can pull guys off of. And with the taxi system instead of the minor leagues or like the Mets where they used to have to bring guys from Las Vegas and fly them all the way to New York. You're going to have guys easily at your disposal to get back into the lineup. So yes, I think this will continue, and I think teams have to be given the freedom. I mean, players have to be given the freedom to make these choices as the season goes on, because it is still a 66-day span. A lot can change, and they need the freedom to make the decision that they feel is best for them.
Now, you mentioned Mike Trout, Eddie, and I'm wondering one thing. A lot of people have put in input recently about, should he play, should he not? Do you feel with how much conversation this has had that there's going to be a lot of pressure on what decision he makes when it's said and done?
Well, there's going to be the certain Angels fans who want him to just keep playing anyway that might try to pressure him. But, I mean, I don't think there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure. It's Mike Trout's decision. It's Mike Trout's kid. It's Mike Trout's decision to decide what Mike Trout does. So I don't think he should be influenced by people. And, he's not the type of person who's really going to be swung by people. That's the main criticism sometimes of Mike Trout. He's not the most outspoken person for a superstar of a sport. When you think about someone like a LeBron James, a Tom Brady, and Alex Ovechkin, and the other three major sports, they're guys that you hear about in mainstream. Not only are they outspoken sometimes on social issues, you hear them in commercials and stuff. Mike Trout, yeah, he does some stuff like that, but he's not nearly as much. You don't really hear him talking that much, to be honest. And he's a quiet guy. And I think he keeps to himself, and I think he'll successfully make the decision that's best for him. I'm going to transition away from baseball. We got two more things to get to. We're going to talk NASCAR, and then I do have a couple flaming debate topics we're going to finish off with today, because we got a couple interesting things that I'm going to throw at you. But let's start with NASCAR. Texas, which actually I thought was a pretty entertaining race, because we saw some strategy, that big wreck that happened with Truex and Kyle Busch. And how about that for Richard Childress Racing getting their second straight week that we have an upset winner in the Cup Series? It's Austin Dillon getting his first win since 2018, third Cup win overall. Rookie Tyler Reddick second on strategy. They held off past champions Logano and Busch to get the win at Texas. It was difficult to pass, I'll say that, and it got a little boring early on in the race, but maybe it was the wrecks, maybe it was the strategy, maybe it was a combo of both. But I felt like even the second stage and definitely the third were, pretty exciting given what Texas Motor Speedway typically offers.
Well, we did, I believe, on the last podcast, Eddie, when we were going to talk about Texas, was that, it tends to be in regards of how the race goes, 8, 9 cars left on the lead lap when it's all said and done. Now, the Austin Dillon victory, that was a big surprise, and then Tyler Reddick as well, on no tires from the back of the field, finished second. That's pretty solid as well. A very good day for him. And, that was absolutely huge for RCR. But the thing I want to mostly talk about as well is, what was Quinn Huff doing? What just – did they even come out yet with, was it a spotter issue, or did he just simply run out of talent to not realize that, I don't know, like – it wasn't even the fact that he wasn't clear. I would understand if there's one car behind him and, hey, you made a mistake, you thought you were clear. There was 4 guys behind you. How do you make a mistake like that? I understood if you cut down a tire. I can understand, maybe if, hey, he ran out of fuel and the rear end came around from him. But he decided to force pit from the middle lane and ruin 4 guys' day as a result of that.
Apparently on Twitter, he claimed he thought he was clear. He made a mistake and everything. He feels bad, but, thank all the Starcom Fiber things and everything. But you know what? Come on. He's 22 years old. He barely raced in any of the lower series, but he gets this Cup ride with Spire last year, which is one thing, racing part-time schedule. Then somehow, for some reason, Derek Cope and everybody in charge at Starcom Racing does not re-sign Landon Castle, who is a very solid driver wherever he goes, and they choose Quinn Huff, who was a bit of a danger on the track last year. He's not ready. He should be racing the Xfinity or the Truck Series. I think in the future he could be a decent driver, and you know what? I've excused certain situations because, there's a lot of people who always criticize certain NASCAR teams and certain NASCAR drivers as silver spoon people like an Austin Dillon, or people who just have a ride because of the company their father or grandfather run, like a Paul Menard or an Austin Cindric. But at least those guys can be competitive and they're not dangers on the track. On the other hand, we've got Quinn Huff out here up against the outside wall, looking like me playing a video game, trying to deliberately wreck the field or something, and just coming all the way down, gets sideswept by Christopher Bell, hits to Benedetto, and then slams the outside wall. I mean, I don't understand what happened there with the 00, and frankly, I don't understand why Starcom Racing would sign him in the first place at the end of last year. But the other wreck I want to talk about was that crazy incident off the restart where Keselowski somehow was in the lead, pulled a little bit of strategy. Ryan Blaney gets loose. The whole field checks up. It looked very similar to the big 2010 wreck there when they were 4 wide with Tony Stewart and Gordon. Very similar. Kyle Busch gets clipped by Almirola, Truex in the wall, and so many cars get taken out. Both of the JTG entries, Chris Buescher, Custer was in it, Matt Kenseth, Bubba Wallace. I mean, a lot of good cars that were running around the middle of the field ran into Truex. A lot of hard hits there. But, I mean, that was just a situation where there was just not enough racetrack and too many cars right there. But a tough day for some of these guys. And I thought it was hilarious in some ways that it was the same group of cars for the most part that were just involved in the incident at Indianapolis on pit road a couple of weeks before, including Truex, Buescher, and both the JTG cars wiped out 2 times in the last 3 Cup races. I mean, that's very frustrating for them, and they just had nowhere to go in that crash. But, I mean, you don't usually see that big of an accident in a mile and a half, and there were a lot of wrecks, a lot of cars going around, a lot of strategy too, but frankly, it set up some action, and it set up that strategy that Austin Dillon and Tyler Reddick eventually used to get 1-2 for RCR for the first time since 2011.
You know, again, these wreck fests in particular just tend to bring the surprise winner. And I know Kentucky wasn't a wreck fest, and Cole Custer went on to win. That was a huge surprise. But, you know, I look at it for Texas, and again, I mean, that created a very interesting outcome simply because of that. I know for Martin Truex Jr., that's got to be frustrating because if I'm not mistaken too, he was right behind that incident with Quinn Huff as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he mentioned, I think he got damaged, but it was from the debris, which is why I mentioned 4 guys. I don't think he made contact with any of the cars in front, but I know for a fact he was right behind, and that created some issues as well because he had to pit and take some extra time and work his way back through the field. But that race was, you know, up and down for so many people. You know, and another car too, I know another guy's day that got ruined in that wreck didn't mention, Alex Bowman.
Yeah.
He went through the grass and he destroyed the splitter, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately that caused him some issues. And I'm surprised he didn't spin back in front of the field because every time I think about Texas, I also tend to think about that incident in particular as well with Dale Earnhardt Jr., if you remember years ago, where the day after it rained, he drove over the grass, you know, trying to avoid a car that broke a little bit loose in front of him. His car absolutely exploded. The brake line, you know, caught on fire, and Jimmy Johnson's windshield, who was behind, literally got caved in because of the dirt.
Yeah, I remember that as well. I also remember Kyle Larson blowing a tire and having a big crash there a couple of years ago. So Texas does produce some pretty big wrecks. But now the focus has to be on points. We've got 8 races left in the regular season, including a couple of wild cards with both the Daytona Road Course, which they announced will not have practice or qualifying. So that's just going to be absolutely idiotic. The Daytona regular season finale on the actual oval, which is going to be very exciting. And then Kansas this Thursday, which, like Texas, also produces a lot of big wrecks often. So that should be an interesting race. And to me is the most exciting of all the mile and a halves because there's always multi-group racing there. There's always a lot of excitement, and it really seems to work well with the package. But focusing on the playoffs now, with Austin Dillon and Cole Custer clinching spots, Cole Custer, points-wise, had no chance at making the playoffs. Austin Dillon was on the outside looking in just barely. Now he's locked in. Suddenly Kyle Busch only has 3 spots of buffer above him from the cutoff, and he still doesn't have a playoff point this season, which is amazing. Jimmy Johnson's chances continue to get worse and worse after he had trouble in this race. I mean, just nothing goes right for that 48 team this season. And now you got Bubba Wallace getting close to the cutoff. Almirola's not too far above anymore. Eric Jones, Reddick. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see who makes the playoffs.
Yeah, and at first we really thought this was going to be a great year for Matty D as well, and all of a sudden now things are starting to fade away. In fact, teams that really started the year hot have really fallen apart. The 88 crew, for example, Alex Bowman, he's faded a little bit. Jimmy Johnson seemed like he was competing for a win every week to open up the year. Now he can't catch a break. Kyle Busch is starting to come to life. I still think the 18 will win a race
Me too.
before the playoffs. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of probably, to be honest, I think the next time they go to a short track, I think he's going to be the one to look out for. I mean, I don't know. He could turn around and win this week. But you mentioned the Daytona road course. And I go back to the Roval the first time they went there and how much of a wild card race this was. And obviously, Ryan Blaney, who openly has admitted he is terrible at road course racing and really had no expectations going in that race of even finishing inside the top 10, went on to win that race because Jimmy Johnson and Martin Truex Jr. wiped each other out in the last corner.
Yeah, not that. Also, the 14-car accident that was like 4 laps before when nobody made it through turn one. Decided not to turn left. I mean, that race was crazy. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the Daytona road course could end up being just like that.
But now I do point this out. Obviously, the Roval required a lot of practice. But do you think that NASCAR turned around and said no practice, no qualifying for one reason? Do you think it's because a lot of these drivers have actually raced the road course before just in the 24 hours of Daytona? That's the only thing I can really think of. Do you think that could be the reason why?
Well, I feel like a lot of the NASCAR drivers who had raced the 24 hours of Daytona before have retired. You think about guys like Jeff Gordon, Jamie McMurray, Montoya. Those were the guys who were racing that every year. I mean, there's still a few out there who've done it before, but I don't know. I do think, at least because this is, an actual racetrack that has existed before, there's footage these guys can look at. It's not like the Roval where there was just a couple tests they could look at, and both of them ended up in big crashes, I remember, with Eric Jones and Chase Elliott. They both did private tests, and they ended up wrecking at the end of it. But, I mean, I think the Daytona road course will be a wild card for sure. We could see a surprising winner. I also think the race might be a bit, I don't know, I think it might be a bit on the boring side after the first couple laps for probably all of stage 1 and 2, because these guys might treat it like a practice session for the beginning part just to try to figure this track out. But then I think stage 3, it could get wild. And there's also been a lot of talk about if they would include a chicane right on the front stretch because of the amount of speed that these cars would pick up. But then you're just modeling it after the Roval. And just stick with the track that's actually worked before and has been used in a series for years for a 24-hour race. I don't know why they would have to alter it, but I wish they were going to Watkins Glen, frankly. But you know what? This is going to be an interesting race. It's an interesting new track. And remember, this is the Clash now starting next year. It's going to be on this Daytona road course, but I did not expect this to get a points race this early on. But the one thing, at least it's not the cutoff race. I mean, I feel like the cutoff race there would be a little ridiculous. I mean, the oval's going to be wild too, especially if people on the cutoff get wiped out in a big one. And this cutoff battle is one of the more exciting we've actually seen in the last few years because there's so many good drivers in and out of the playoffs right now. But I'm going to brush off on NASCAR now and get into our flaming debate topics. There's a couple things today. And number one, I don't know if you saw this, but Antonio Brown has announced his retirement from the NFL for the third time since September 22nd of last year, saying that he's done, God's done him good and everything else. He's came, he saw, he's conquered. I mean, I don't understand this. I still think he's going to be back at some point. I still think if there's an NFL this season, I could see both him and Colin Kaepernick getting signed to a team.
If I'm Tom Brady, I make a phone call right now and tell him to A, take down that tweet, but also B, come back. I mean, unless Antonio Brown, and this goes back to the legal case situation, knows that he is in defeat. That's the only way I can think of in terms of a retirement. But I just feel, again, this is a publicity stunt. You know, there's something going on with Antonio Brown, rather if it's a mental battle, you know, or just something personally right now. I know these legal cases could be stressful is going on. He's not acting like himself. And I really, A, hope Antonio continues to reach out with help, but also B, just like Josh Gordon, he is a good football player when he's on the field. And I know they're two very different situations, but they do come together in regard of that they are talented wide receivers. So I really hope this isn't the end of AB. But if it is, hey, he's had a good run. You have to realize, too, he already surpassed year-wise of what the average NFL span is in terms of age for a wide receiver. Most wide receivers would be towards the end of their career right now anyways. So in that regard, he's done a very good job. He's come a very long way from some guy that was just supposed to be a punt returner and a kick returner to arguably the best receiver this game's seen in a very long time. So, again, is he done? In my opinion, probably not. But, it's whatever. I mean, if he wants to keep on saying he's retiring every other day, it gets the media and the fans going. I just think it's a publicity stunt. What about you?
I mean, yeah, I agree it's a publicity stunt. I do not think he's one of the best receivers in the last 10 years. I mean, he's up there, but I think Julio Jones is above him. I think Hopkins is above him, and I think Michael Thomas is above him. Because, I mean, he's just destroying his legacy at this point. Every single one of these moves, going all the way back to the whole thing with Oakland. I mean, I don't know if it's all his fault, but it's just getting ridiculous at this point. He's just like Conor McGregor almost in terms of the amount of, I don't know, a headache he can be to the people around him at this point. And I don't know what else he can do. And if there's any team, because there's been talks about the Seahawks trying to bring in Josh Gordon and Antonio Brown into the same offense. Why? Why would you do that? You were a good team. You've got a chance to win the NFC West because the 49ers did not change anything this year. Don't do that. Do you really want both of them and Marshawn Lynch all on the same offense? Do you realize how much chaos that would be? I don't know if Pete Carroll can control that. I mean, I just think that would be a ridiculous decision on Seattle's part.
Well, hold on. Is Marshawn Lynch back this year? I thought he was just a soft deal for the playoffs, and that was it.
What I'm saying is that there's a good chance he could be back one more
Oh,
time.
well, yeah, that is the case because let's be honest, if there's one thing about Seattle since he's retired, those running backs don't stop getting injured. It's like they have a running back injury every other week. They can have, even gosh, I remember when Thomas Rawls was the future for the Seahawks, and now he's not even in the league anymore. It feels like at this point. Mm-hmm. But overall, I guess I can understand why they're making a case for AB and Josh Gordon in Seattle. I mean, there's a lot of pressure put on a Tyler Lockett. This isn't a wide receiver staff anymore that has a Doug Baldwin that you have to remember was a very good wide receiver for them. Now it's really mostly Lockett expected to, step up in a big role. And I mean, sure, they do have other good receivers around them. That's not the case, but I think it's adding depth. That's the key thing and why I think this conversation's happening. And let's be honest, there's no one who cuts and releases like AB in terms of free agent wide receivers that are still out there. But I think the number one conversation shouldn't be Antonio Brown, Eddie. I think it's who the heck is going to get Jadeveon Clowney? I want to know who's getting Clowney because that is a number one key signing. I think if you're going to want to win a Super Bowl, if you're going to want to win games, you need an edge rusher, and Clowney's that guy. Forget about a guy that's been out of the league for the year. Forget about someone who can't pass a drug test. Talk about a guy who's played 16 games, was projected to be the number one bust in draft history, and has turned his career around to be a superstar. That's what I want to know about.
Yeah, I mean, he's been good, but I don't know. I know there's been COVID the last few months, and it's been hard to get these negotiations done. But if he's still out there now on July 20th, there's got to be some sort of a reason. I mean, whether it's some sort of injury thing that teams have looked into the physicals or what, I think there's got to be a reason at this point that we're 6 weeks away from the expected start of the NFL regular season, and he's not on a team. But, I mean, there's still going to be a lot of changes. I think somebody's going to sign him. If Antonio Brown, I don't know, decides to unretire in the next 3 days, which I wouldn't be surprised by, he might still be out there. I mean, and you also wonder with Kaepernick, too, if somebody tries to bring him in after everything that's happened these last couple months. But
I still think that if he does come back, it's going to be the Chargers. I
yeah,
just think that's the perfect fit. I see that being not just a media connection, but also the fact too, I mean, it's a very quiet franchise still with the change, and he can get more fans. And I mean, obviously there's going to be no fans in the stadiums, but he can get more fans in a franchise that needs fans desperately right now as well.
and that moves into my second debate topic of three. It's about Kaepernick because he's been rumored around three different teams for the most part. The Chargers are one. We've also heard about Seattle as a backup. But then another one that started to pop up is the New Orleans Saints. I feel like this is just something with Drew Brees and Sean Payton trying to alleviate everything from when Drew Brees took his stand about standing for the national anthem a couple months ago, and then when Drew Brees has to do two different apologies, then he's got to have his wife apologize for him on Instagram, then we got to get a Saints apology, and now, frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if this is something at Brees' direction. Bring in Kaepernick, put him on the roster, or even try to use him as like a Taysom Hill type thing and the offense, because he's not giving up the quarterback spot for Colin Kaepernick. But I just feel like he's not going to fit in New Orleans. They have a backup quarterback. What are they going to do? Are they just going to start using Kaepernick in these weird positions like Taysom Hill when he hasn't played in the NFL for 4 years and has never done anything other than be a quarterback? This just feels idiotic. And like you said, the Chargers are the best option.
Well, I mean, take a deep look at the Teddy Bridgewater experiment. Now, don't get me wrong; they won every game with Teddy at quarterback. But Teddy, again, he's an average quarterback. Don't get me wrong; I'm excited to see what he does for the Carolina Panthers. But what was promised to him didn't happen. Colin Kaepernick, if he went there, and I'm eager to see what position he'd be labeled as, I wouldn't be surprised if they labeled him as their number 2 wide receiver, as you mentioned, in a Taysom Hill-like deal. Because let's be honest about this, okay? You can't tell me that this man could sit out, 3-4 years now, and then come back and be immediately expected to be a number 2 backup QB. And that's not saying that he doesn't have the talent to do so. It's just the fact that he's been out of the game that long. If Tim Tebow, who missed 1 year, and I know Tebow had his arm issues, but if you're telling me Tim Tebow couldn't beat out Matt Barkley after missing a season to be the Eagles' number 3 quarterback, you're not going to convince me Colin Kaepernick is going to beat out Taysom Hill, who really should be the future of this team. And I'm going to say this, Eddie, if they do sign Colin Kaepernick, I really think this is just a manipulative plan by Sean Payton to really have Taysom Hill continue to go under the radar so teams undervalue him on a weekly basis, because I just don't know how this man is still not in the conversation as the future of the Saints, because it seems like they throw up a big name to kind of put him back under the radar every single season.
Yeah, it's been sneaky how long Taysom Hill's been there and all these different things. And, you've never heard about the Saints specifically. Who's going to replace Drew Brees? Everybody talks about how old Tom Brady is. Drew Brees is 41 years old. He's going to start to slow down eventually. He hasn't really that much yet, but I don't agree, though, that Kaepernick is for this reason. I think this would be something under the direction of Drew Brees, because we know how respected he is in New Orleans. We also know how New Orleans is very democratic as well, and there were a lot of people who are faithful to the New Orleans Saints who are not happy with Drew Brees' comments. But doing something like this and trying to direct them to bring in Colin Kaepernick, I think, would just be idiotic. And you know what? You want to bring politics onto the football field? He's done that. Kaepernick's done that. First of all, I don't see how those two could even mesh together with their beliefs. But second of all, you're not helping the situation. You're just trying to use Kaepernick to try to make yourself look better after that whole incident occurred. So, this has all been speculation. And I still think if he goes anywhere this year, it would be the Chargers, just like you. But we're going to leave it there and move on to our third and final debate topic, which is mainly just something, did you catch it? And it's from the IndyCar race at Iowa. One thing that I got to say that I am impressed, I am so happy that they put the aero screen above the drivers, because did you see the thing under caution with Colton Herta and Rinus VeeKay, where Herta, the car got launched up into the air and just right over the guy's head. That's such a dangerous situation. In past years, that could have been a very serious accident. But fortunately, they were both just fine, and that really is a testament to what IndyCar's done. I know there's the traditionalists out there who are like, this defeats, IndyCar makes the cars doesn't make them look like open wheel cars. But you know what? It's a little thing to protect the drivers. I don't see what the big deal is here, and that was the first proof. That might have saved a life.
No, indeed, it definitely saved a life. I'm so glad that Hurt is okay, and it's very rare to see an incident like that under yellow, because I think in Iowa in particular, with it being, a short, arguably intermediate track, you want to be, these guys are all close together. And the other thing is it's so multi-groove and wide open that even at full speed, if they were under green, let's say if that incident were to pop up, that could be an even more of a dangerous incident, Eddie. And, I applaud IndyCar. The moves that they've made to make these drivers safer, and I understand fans saying, oh, it's not the traditional open wheel. Well, let me tell you, every time you go to Pocono, do you want someone to die every time they get into an accident? Because it seems like every time they go to Pocono, someone's getting hurt every single year. And I know Pocono is just one instance, but it's been the most current instance of recent. So to me, don't knock IndyCar for trying to protect its drivers. If anything, applaud them. But then also turn around and say, hey, okay, if they don't feel like the cars are open wheel anymore, then come up with an alternate solution. Because to me, right now, this is the best thing IndyCar's made in a very long time. And that instance saved a life. And overall, I think there's going to be more life-saving technology that's going to be added to Indy cars over the years, and I would say really in the next couple seasons, because I think that was just the beginning, and I think they're also going to really look at Herta's accident there and see, what failed, what didn't, or what failed and what was successful rather, and I think that's going to help them create more technology.
So that's going to wrap things up today. It was an exciting weekend in sports, but we've got a fun week ahead. And Thursday will be a fun show as well. It'll go up at 6 o'clock, so it'll be on before the start of the baseball season. It'll be me and Tim, as you guys remember, last week we went through our 10 playoff teams. We will go through who we think will win the World Series from that, as well as our predictions for awards, because they are still giving out awards, not All-Stars, but Cy Young, MVP, Manager of the Year. Those are still going to be out there. And we're going to be joined by Zoe Alter to help us out. She went to the Bruce Beck Sports Broadcasting Camp with me and Tim in the past. She's a big baseball fan. She'll be talking about that. We're going to talk a little NFC North football with her as well. So that should be fun on Thursday. But that's going to wrap things up today, and we'll see you on Thursday. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Sports Speak. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at Sports Speak Live. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
We'll see you guys next time.